Hello, I'm Douglas Johnson, and welcome to Day Tripping. So today I want to talk about something that I often look for when I'm out walking around any cities or anywhere. Something that I think is overlooked, and when I first noticed them, now I try to find them whenever I go out walking, particularly in older cities, and that's these things, boot scrapers. Um, what they are is just as their name implies. They're ways of scraping mud and muck and stuff off your shoes before you enter a home. Um, so I lived in New York, I lived in Boston, and I'd be wandering around and I'd see, I'd look at the buildings like I often do, look at the architecture, and in the railings, I would always notice like there were these cutouts, and they'd have these little bars in them, and I was curious as like what they were, and then I started seeing more and more of them, and I made me realize that they're more than just a design feature that was in a particular railing. This was something that was used because they looked different. Everyone had like some would have like little ornate designs, some were very simple, and then I started seeing them like by themselves just on the street, like on the stoops and stuff, and it made me realize that these were used for something, that there was a reason for them to be there. It wasn't just a design element. And it's something that if you're not aware of, for the most part, you'll walk right by them. I mean, take a look at this photograph. This is in Boston. I had no idea when I lived in Boston. I lived there for 5 years, and I had no idea that the boot scrapers were a thing. I mean, look at this picture. Tell me where the boot scrapers are. I'll put it full screen. Take a look at it. All right, I'll circle it, and there it is. You'll see they're kind of small and out of the way in most places, but in other places they're right there. They're very obvious. They're very large. So what are they? Why are they there? And who was using them? So these things actually had a really small window of time that they were used. It was about between the mid 18th century through the 19th century into the early 20th century. So only about 150, 175 years was the time period that you would have found a boot scraper out in a railing or outside of a home. And the reason for that is before the mid 18th century, before the mid 17 or the late 1700s, most people just didn't walk around cities. If you ever seen like Victorian era workers, they worked. I mean, you were either at work or you were at home, and your walking was from your home to your job and back again. You really didn't do much like casual strolling around the cities. It wasn't until people started having exposable or disposable income that they could go out and wander around. And then it became a sign of prestige that you had leisure time and you could be out on the street and you wanted to be seen. There was even a word for this. It was called perambulate or perambulations. There's a great clip in Deadwood where the guy's asking people if he wants to join his perambulating club.
Well, why don't we just walk together when we happen to be out?
We could, or we could dedicate ourselves to the principle of walking together. Maybe all we need is a name. The Ambulators.
So once people started walking around for leisure, and they weren't just going to work and then wearing their work clothes and then coming home and changing into their, I don't know, even clothes or casual clothes or simply taking their shoes off, they needed to be able to clean those shoes. And there was a really good reason for that, because cities weren't clean. Like today, we just take it for granted that we're going to go out, we're going to walk around, and we're not going to step in like mud or horse poop or dog poop or anything like that. The streets are more or less clean. I mean, yeah, your shoes get dirty and you'd want to wipe your shoes off before coming into the home. Or if you're like me, you take your shoes off when you enter your home to keep the house clean. Back then, there was a trade of people who cleaned carpets. There was even these little hoop-like things that people would spend all day just beating a carpet for very little money. And it had to be agonizing work. So you wanted to try to keep the muck outside and less of it in your home. And boot scrapers helped with that. And cities, when I say cities were filthy, cities were dirty. Just to give you a little idea of just how filthy the streets were, especially in New York City, I found this article on a website called petpooskiddo.com. And they wrote this interesting article or essay about this. And here's what they wrote. By the late 19th century, more than 150,000 horses would be on the streets of New York City at any given time. If you look at any old photographs, even up until the turn of the century, well, up until about World War II, you'll see horses all over the place in New York City. I found a couple of good movie clips that were made by Thomas Edison that shows just well, horses doing everyday stuff. Anyway, and each of these sizable creatures would produce an average of 20 pounds of manure a day. That's over 3 million pounds within 24 hours just within the city grid. That's a lot of poop. Not to mention an extra 40,000 gallons of urine on a daily basis. It must have been rivers of pee just going down through the gutters. I can't really imagine that today. I've worked on farms. I've mucked stalls. I've been peed on by a horse. I see how much urine comes out of that animal. That's just one animal. So yeah, I can only imagine what it was like to have 150,000 horses around. So it continues. An appropriate word to describe the amount of manure on the ground would be omnipresent. So it was everywhere. It was simply, and they continue on, it was simply everywhere and almost impossible to avoid. It wasn't uncommon to find it on the bottom of your shoes, and women would find their dresses becoming soiled as they walked down the streets. That had to be fun. Many times people would find themselves shin high or sometimes even knee high in the city's debris that was an unsightly mix of feces, rotten food, and general rubbish that was littering the roadways. So yeah, a way of cleaning the shoes, the bottom of your shoes, became a necessity if you're going to live in a city, especially if you wanted to go out and walk for any period of time and return home. So as they started building the cities, they started incorporating these boot scrapers into like city blocks. So you'd find whole areas that had the same or similar boot scrapers either built into the railings or built into the stoops. Here's a photograph, again, from Boston. And you'll see each one of these stoops has a little boot scraper on them. Again, they're small, and I'll point them out to you. And they came in all shapes and sizes. You can order personalized ones from, a metalsmith or something like that. They have a little Dachshund dog, and they were advertised in the Sears and Roebuck catalog, which was the most popular. It was the Amazon Sears, and if you don't know what Sears and Roebuck was, it was basically the Amazon of its day. Anything you wanted, you could order from Sears and Roebuck, and I believe you could even order like a whole house from Sears and Roebuck. And while you were ordering and picking out your house, you could pick out some good boot scrapers to match it. So as people were starting to build buildings and incorporate this into their lifestyles, it became the fashion to have a boot scraper. Anybody who was worth their salt had boot scrapers, and it probably was a sign of prestige. Just like being out walking and being able to be seen with leisure time was probably a sign of wealth. Having the boot scraper was probably a similar symbol of wealth. Now, I don't know that. I'm guessing based upon everything I've read, but I have a feeling that was partially correct. And part of that feeling is based off of another article I found. This one from the Encyclopedia of Cottage, Farm, and Villa Architecture and Furniture by John Claudius Ledune. It was published in London in 1939. And they wrote, scrapers for the feet may be let into the wall of the cottage on each side of the door, a cavity being left over the scraper for the foot, and one under it for the dirt. There are various forms of scrapers for building into walls, which may be had from every ironmonger. And all that the cottager has to do is to choose one analogous to the style of their house. There are detached scrapers in endless variety. The most complete are those which have brushes fixed on the edge on each side of the scraper. So yeah, so you could scrape your boot, and then there was little brushes you could brush off the sides of the shoes. Basically clean the whole shoe off before you entered the home. And as I said, before long, every well-to-do family had a boot scraper, and you'll still find them if you go walking around the city. There's so many of them to this day. They're still there. Once the cities started getting cleaner with better sanitation and less horses, and people had cars and taxis, their feet weren't getting quite as mucked up and dirty. So a simple doormat would have sufficed just to clean off the bottom of your shoes. And then as time goes on and railings get damaged or they rust or buildings get torn down, when they replaced them, they just didn't replace them with the scrapers because they weren't needed. The only people that would replace it with the scraper would do it for design, a design element, just to have like a vintage look there. But you can still walk around, and if you see the old railings, you'll see the cutouts in them, and a lot of them are rusted away, and especially the ones that were in the concrete. Those concrete isn't really good with metal. Concrete makes metal rust faster, from what I understand. So those will rust away a lot. So you'll see these little, maybe little metal nubs sticking out with like a brown stain on the concrete, or you'll see the old pitted, rusted metal iron piece of the boot scraper on there, which makes for a cool thing to find if you're out walking around and you're looking for these things. And yeah, so that's why I find them interesting, because it's another, like, just a little thing that you can just go around and look for. Just like I go out and look for these air raid sirens, that people, they're everywhere, and people just don't see them because it's just such a part of the landscape. Well, it's the same thing with these boot scrapers, and these are much smaller. They don't stand out quite as well as a giant siren that's in the sky. They're in the fences, and they only exist in some cities. Cities like New York or Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Boston. I don't know if Chicago has them, but cities like that, you're probably going to find a boot scraper if you look. And if you're in Europe, I mean, those cities are older. It's a good chance you're going to find buildings that were built in the 18th century or the 1700s, where you're not going to find as many of those the further west you go in the United States. So yeah, while you're out wandering around and you come across an old building, look at the railings, look at the stoop. Maybe you'll see a boot scraper, and take a picture of it, or let me know where you see it and what you think is. Let me know in the comments below, and also let me know what little things that you have seen that are something that you find interesting when you go out walking, that I might be overlooking, that everybody might be overlooking, so we can all go out and appreciate the little architectural elements that are slowly fading away or that are hidden in the landscape. Until then, I'm Douglas Johnson. This is Day Tripping, and as always, try to get out, stay safe, and stay healthy.